Apparently, it's trade season in August with the Seahawks making their second trade already this month to shore up their linebacking core and reunite Mike Macdonald with a former player from Michigan. I'll be diving into all the trade details coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you as always, whether you're tuning in from Bremerton, Washington, or Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're drawing closer to Saturday's preseason finale, and the Seahawks are in the middle of trade season. Their second trade in a couple of weeks. They dealt Nick Harris back to the Cleveland Browns a few weeks ago with Connor Williams coming in as the projected new starting center. And then on Thursday, dealing Mike Jackson, the reliable veteran corner, to the Carolina Panthers for rookie linebacker Michael Barrett, a 7th-round pick out of Michigan. Now, this might not seem like a fair trade in the sense that Mike Jackson has started 21 games the last 2 seasons. And at least in my opinion, he has been a quality starter when he has had his opportunities. And Michael Barrett is a 7th-round pick that has never played a regular season snap in the NFL. But the reality is that this deal came together because Mike Jackson was kind of on the outside looking in at this point in the cornerback group. Seattle had Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, and Trey Brown in front of him. Artie Burns was getting snaps ahead of him in the slot. You've got Nehemiah Pritchett, DJ James, who were drafted on day 3. And who knows if both those guys are going to make this 53-man roster from the outset, but the Seahawks are excited about the potential of both those players. It is a deep position group. And with Jackson being in the last year of his deal and having a salary that was north of $2 million this year because he was a restricted free agent tender signing, this came together and it wasn't necessarily unpredictable. In fact, I'm not surprised. I mentioned earlier this offseason and earlier in training camp that if there was a player that the Seahawks were potentially going to be dangling as trade bait, it would be Mike Jackson, because again, he is a player that has proven in 21 starts with the Seahawks that he is a capable NFL starter. He's a solid tackler. He makes plays in the football. Not a lot of interceptions, only one of them the last couple of years, but he gets his hands on the football. He plays with physicality. He's got good size, and he's got that dog mentality. So with a lot of teams in the league being in far worse shape than the Seahawks are at cornerback, there's some teams that have been hit by injuries. Carolina is one of them. They're looking for all the help they can get at cornerback. So this trade was able to come together with the Seahawks bringing in a linebacker in Barrett, who previously played for new coach Mike Macdonald, 1 season at Michigan. Now, Barrett was mostly a special teams player, less than 150 defensive snaps that year, but he played on defense some for Mike Macdonald that year, and he really catapulted that to great success his last 2 years with the Wolverines. He was a all Big Ten selection each of the last 2 seasons. And so Barrett already has that built-in relationship with Mike Macdonald. The scheme may not be perfectly what it was in Michigan, but he should have a lot of carryover from that season. He played for Macdonald as the defensive coordinator in Ann Arbor. And so he should be able to hit the ground running. And from Seattle's perspective here, you're able to move a cornerback in Jackson, who, again, he was reliable. He was steady. You got 111 tackles. You got 16 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries from him. He only gave up 3 touchdowns in coverage in 21 starts. This is a player who did a lot of positive things for the Seattle Seahawks, but he's not a star. He was not going to start for this football team. There was a chance he might not have made this football team. So to be able to go out and get somebody that is going to plug a significant hole, at least from a depth perspective, Michael Barrett is going to be able to do that for the Seahawks. You now look at what they've got. Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker. Baker did return to practice today, so that is a really good sign that he's going to potentially be available for week 1. Those are your starters right now in the short term. But beyond those 2 players, the Seahawks don't have a single linebacker on their roster with more than 19 regular season defensive snaps. John Radigan being the seasoned veteran there with less than 20 career regular season defensive snaps. That factoid does not change with Michael Barrett coming in as a 7th round pick. He has never played an NFL snap either. But what this does give the Seahawks, and I'll dive into this a little bit more in the next segment when we look more at the linebacker depth and what this could mean beyond 2024. This gives the Seahawks another young player that they already have some familiarity with, that they can continue to develop. They can come in and play some special teams for him right now. And I think there have been some questions there at that position behind the veterans, Dodson and Baker, who have both had some injuries either in the offseason program or in training camp, and they're on one-year deals. They're on prove-it deals. So the Seahawks are trying to round out a position that depth-wise is not near where the cornerback position is at. So Mike Jackson became expendable. From my understanding, there have been a few teams that have called about his availability. This should not come as a surprise. Again, good veteran cornerbacks, there's going to be some value. You weren't going to get a 4th or 5th round pick for him because he started 21 games and only had 1 interception. Didn't start a lot of games the rest of his career. Most of his playing time has been the last 2 years in Seattle. So he wasn't going to be a guy that was going to be fetching that type of draft capital, but you could maybe get a late round picker. In this case, a guy that was just picked in the 7th round. And the way that I'm looking at this, Michael Barrett gives the Seahawks another draft pick this year, because if they would have had another pick in the 7th round, they didn't have any 7th rounders in this year's draft. If they would have had a 7th round selection, I think there is a very good chance that Michael Barrett is the player they pick if he was still on the board, because Mike Macdonald holds him in high regard. He did get to coach him for a year. The scouting department was looking at his last couple years at Michigan. Macdonald said that today after practice. So this was a guy that was very much on Seattle's radar, and they had a lot of questions at linebacker, both short and long term. So drafting 2 of them, nobody would have batted an eye, and these 2 players are so different. But you're looking at a guy who is a really sound run defender. He's got solid pass rushing numbers as well. He can play pretty solid coverage. He is a pure middle linebacker. So there's a lot of different things the Seahawks can do with him. But I think right now, this was about getting the depth to be bolstered some with players like John Radigan, Patrick O'Connell trying to battle for a final roster spot. Seattle's looking for somebody maybe that can move the needle a little bit more. I don't know that Barrett, I keep wanting to say Michael Bennett, but Michael Barrett, I don't know that the ceiling is necessarily that high for him, but I think you're looking at a guy who has played a lot of football at Michigan against really good competition. He always stepped up to the occasion when they were in the playoffs, played really well. To win the national title last year, was a key contributor for that football team. You're looking at a guy who can come in for you with a pretty high floor. And so maybe he's somebody that in quick order can play some snaps for you on defense, but the Seahawks want to see if that's a possibility. So for them, this was a win-win. And I know there's got to be some disappointment in the building because Mike Jackson's a player that they developed. Yes, he was with a couple of teams before him, but he developed into a capable NFL corner after he came to Seattle. And those are the kind of projects that are really tough to move on from. But there just wasn't a place for him in this secondary right now to be able to make an impact. And so making this trade to get a rookie linebacker who's got 4 years of affordable club control in his contract as a 7th rounder and getting him before the start of his rookie season. I can't say that I've seen this happen very often where a team trades one of their draft picks in a deal in August to bring in a veteran, but Carolina needs cornerback help. Seattle's linebacker. So this ended up being one of those things that really fit well together. And of course, you've got the relationship between John Schneider and Scott Fitterer, who used to be on Seattle's front office staff under John Schneider. So there's already that worked in relationship. Carolina's got Dave Canales as the head coach. There's a lot of familiarity there between the two sides that were able to come together and make this deal. The Seahawks are hoping that Barrett's going to be able to develop into a solid player. And I'm going to build off that coming up next. Beyond just looking at the trade details, where Michael Barrett can fit in right now for the Seahawks, some of the skills that he brings to the table, and why this should brighten the outlook for the Seahawks moving forward. I'll be talking about that up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to skip a mortgage payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat. Along with their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You want to see the Seahawks in their home opener Saturday? preseason finale at Lumen Field against the Browns. You can get seats at one of the loudest venues in the NFL in the lower bowl for under $50. Great seats without breaking the budget, and you're going to get to see some exciting young talent as well as some starters with the regular season approaching. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write in your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast so you can get your daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Seahawks continuing to churn up their roster today, the second time this month that they have made a trade, first dealing Nick Harris to the Cleveland Browns a few weeks ago, with him becoming expendable with their depth at center. Now making a move to bolster the depth at linebacker, sending veteran corner Mike Jackson to the Carolina Panthers in exchange for 7th-round pick linebacker Michael Barrett, who will now be reunited with Mike Macdonald. Of course, that was one of the big storylines when this trade was first announced this morning, that Mike Macdonald's getting one of his guys, a player that he coached for a year at Michigan. Now, granted, he was not a starter. Junior Colson, who was in this same draft and went to the Chargers in the 3rd round, he was an instant starter for Mike Macdonald. But Michael Barrett was more of a rotational defender and a special teams cog that year. Nonetheless, Mike Macdonald got a chance to work with him. He knows the kid really well. And from the conversations that I've had, Michael Barrett was a player who I had on my radar as a high target for the Seahawks on day 3 with their need at linebacker, not just because of the familiarity with Mike Macdonald, but watching the film, I saw a darn good, well-rounded football player that was a very underrated piece on that defense. Had a lot of big names that got drafted much higher than him. Barrett is not the most explosive athlete. In fact, I would not say that he is an above-average athlete in the linebacker position. He did run a 4.7 40, which isn't great, but it's not slow by any means for an inside linebacker. His other testing was not good, though. He had a 20th percentile short shuttle run, 4.55 seconds. That is not good for an off-ball linebacker. But when you turn on the tape and you watch this kid play, you see him moving at a different speed than his athletic testing would suggest. And I think some of it is the IQ. Some of the people that I talked to in the pre-draft process who knew Michael Barrett or had watched him closely at Michigan, that was the first thing that jumped out in their scouting and just their understanding of the players, that he is an incredibly smart football player. He's instinctive. And when you know what you're doing, you can play fast. And so even though he's not a great athlete for his position, he actually moves pretty well. When you turn on the tape, you see some ability to run sideline to sideline. He can get downhill and thump people. He's really solid in coverage as well. Only gave up 1 touchdown in coverage the last 2 years, under 7 yards per reception, had a touchdown return for a pick 6 2 years ago for the Wolverines. And maybe the thing that jumps out to me the most, Mike Macdonald has not been quiet about this. You watch Baltimore the last 2 years, you know how much he likes to blitz players from the 2nd and 3rd levels. And linebackers certainly are included in that mix. Michael Barrett was the most effective pass rusher in college football for linebackers last year, at least based on pass rush win rate. 31.3% of his blitzes were considered a win last year. He generated 19 pressures when you include the playoff games last year. He had 3 sacks. He had 3.5 the year before. So maybe not eye-dropping or jaw-dropping numbers, but this is a guy who has been productive when he's had his opportunities. He had 16 pressures in the regular season last year on just 46 blitz attempts. So it's not like he was a high-volume blitzer, but when he was sent by Michigan, very effective, can get after the quarterback, get quarterback hits, get sacks, and generate pressure. So he checks off all those boxes that Mike Macdonald has always been looking for. And what I think is fascinating about this addition, not just the fact that this is a player that I was high on. I had a 5th-round grade on him, And we talked about him in the pre-draft process. This is a guy that I was very high on, higher than most people were. Ended up going in the 7th, and I think the athletic testing, the fact he's 24 as well, he was on campus for 6 years at Michigan. He's one of those older prospects. There were some other factors that led to him to fall to that point, but I think he's a very good player for a 7th-round pick. But I'm intrigued by the possibility of pairing him with Tyrese Knight now. You end up with 2 draft picks, even though you're not the team that picked Barrett. You now have 2 draft selections at the linebacker position who have 4 years of club control on cheap rookie contracts, who really have contrasting styles that I believe are going to work really well together. Barrett is not a great athlete. I've already mentioned that a few times. Like, the testing matches that, but he plays faster than that on the field. He's well-rounded. He can stop the run. Even though he's only 5'11", he's 233 pounds. He's short and stocky, so he can take on blocks. He can shed blocks. He's physical against the run. 19 pressures last year. He had 3 forced fumbles, a couple of pass breakups. He's been one of the better off-ball linebackers in coverage in college football the last 2 years. And so the Seahawks could certainly use that. And then you look at Tyrese Knight, totally different player. Knight didn't have the greatest combine ever for a linebacker, but he is a twitchy athlete. He is a sideline to sideline, disruptive, hair on fire, going after the quarterback style player that really fits that weak side linebacker position well. That's where the Seahawks have been playing him so far. So when I look at a long-term outlook here, I don't think the Seahawks are going to be counting on either one of these players to play a lot of snaps this year. If there's an injury, then obviously it could happen. But I think Seattle's looking 2025 and beyond with this move to get Michael Barrett, put him with Tyrese Knight as your weak side and middle linebackers. Mike Macdonald is looking at foundational pieces. That's what he's hoping that he has here. 2 guys with different skill sets that both have great strengths that are different. They are better suited to play the 2 specific linebacker positions with those skill sets. And they have complementary talents that really should make a well-rounded middle of this defense. They've obviously got to develop. And it's 2 different players in the sense that, as I mentioned, I think it's a high floor, lower ceiling player in Barrett that's already pretty well developed. It doesn't have as many tools, as many traits to really expand upon his talent. Whereas Tyrese Knight, it feels like the sky is the limit for him with what he already did at UTEP and being a guy that still seems kind of raw in some ways. So it's 2 different types of players that are on different trajectories, and yet they could really work well together in this defense. So I think that's what the Seahawks were thinking here. You know, they're hoping that Michael Barrett, with that past experience playing for Mike Macdonald, what he did at Michigan, just the really sound technical football player that he is, that putting him next to Tyrese Knight, that they could have 2 building blocks at that linebacker position who could play together from 2025 to 2027 on cheap rookie contracts and potentially play at a high level. And I think that that is something that they absolutely had to do. They needed to bring somebody in, whether it was through a trade or on the waiver wire. They needed to add somebody else in this linebacker spot that had upside, that potentially could play on Sundays for them on defense. Michael Barrett is going to give them that. Again, I don't think he's going to be asked to do much this year other than special teams. He was a good special teams player at Michigan for Jay Harbaugh, so there's already that relationship there as well. But I look at this as a situation where the Seahawks, their outlook at the position, at least long-term, is dramatically better looking with this deal. I really like it, and that doesn't mean you can't add a linebacker in next year's draft, which is looking like is going to be a better draft at linebacker than it was this past season. You can add somebody else and up the competition, but this puts the Seahawks in a better position both now and down the road with 2 guys who could be building blocks for this defense. And I think that makes this an exciting trade. And it really makes things a little less cloudy. Obviously, if Tyrell Dodson or Jerome Baker plays really well this year, there's going to be calls for them to re-sign one or both those guys, and that changes everything. But if you're looking for players that Mike Macdonald has handpicked to play in his defense, that are young players that he can develop and groom, right now he's got both of them in Tyrese Knight and Michael Barrett. So that should be an exciting thing for Seahawks fans. And yes, as I said, the organization trading away Mike Jackson, probably that was a bittersweet thing because he developed in Seattle into the player that he is, and he was a favorite within the building. But you have to move guys sometimes to get what you wanted, and he just didn't have a spot that was standing out right now in that secondary to begin with. Get what you can, give him a better opportunity to play elsewhere, and add to that linebacker group. So I think this is a chance to be a really thrifty trade for the Seattle Seahawks down the line, because I do think Barrett is one of those rare late round guys that has the goods to be able to start. You saw it on tape at Michigan. I think he can start in the NFL. There may be some limitations on his ceiling, but putting him with Tyrese Knight, I think it at least creates an exciting future potentially for the Seahawks at linebacker. Up next, the Seahawks will face the Browns on Saturday night in the preseason finale. And for fans in attendance of the game, hey, you're not just going to be watching third and fourth stringers. A lot of starters going to get to play, including Geno Smith. I'm going to be diving into what I'm going to be watching on offense with the starters in particular as they get their first action of the season heading towards week 1 against the Broncos. I'll be diving in with that analysis coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Bet on everything from Geno Smith's MVP odds. He's a bit of a dark horse. Might be worth your time. Byron Murphy II's Rookie of the Year odds, or even Mike Macdonald getting Coach of the Year in his first year at the helm for the Seahawks. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that are listening in, and thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The preseason about to wrap up on Saturday night, Seahawks Browns at Lumen Field. And the good news for fans who will be in attendance, a lot of times at preseason games, you don't get to see many, if any, starters. That is not going to be the case in this game. Now, who knows how long the Seahawks and Browns are actually going to let their starters go. It might only be a series or two. But fans in attendance are going to get to see Geno Smith. They're going to get to see a number of starters on both sides of the ball for the Seahawks. I want to focus mostly on offense here because, as Mike Macdonald said after practice today, the defense you have gotten to see, not very much, but you've gotten to see some of your starters these first 2 preseason games. On offense, you really haven't had a chance to see the vast majority of the guys who are expected to start against the Broncos on September 8th. So this is going to present that opportunity to lather them up a little bit, particularly the offensive line. Let them get out there with the pads on, get some hitting in. Geno Smith gets some live reps running Ryan Grubb's offense. So I want to focus on the offense today, what I'm going to be watching with those starters in particular. Now, there's going to be some guys that aren't out there. Noah Fant being one of them. Pharaoh Brown, maybe he's back for week 1. It sounds like the Seahawks are more optimistic than I anticipated on that front, but they're not going to have their top 2 tight ends in this game. I don't expect Ken Walker III is going to play much, if at all. Zach Charbonnet, maybe not either, because he just got back to practice 2 days ago. So there's going to be some missing pieces. But as far as what I'm going to be watching in this game, #1, offensive line continuity. What does this group look like? Missing Abraham Lucas. Connor Williams probably not going to be playing in this game, even though he practiced some this week. Not quite ready to push that yet. But you're going to have Charles Cross out there, Laken Tomlinson, Christian Haynes is going to get his reps, Anthony Bradford. I want to see what that perceived starting group. George Fant may be getting some reps. There's a chance he right now, right tackle. You need to see what that group looks like, especially when there's a chance. I don't know if Myles Garrett's going to be one of the starters that plays for the Cleveland Browns, but if he does, and Cleveland's got some other really good players on that side of the ball in the defensive line, a few that Seattle's familiar with in Shelby Harris and Quentin Jefferson, I expect those 2 are going to play in this game. Maybe Myles Garrett gets some reps as well. This is a solid litmus test, at least for a preseason game against another team that's going to play some starters, to really get an idea where this offensive line is at least with the players that are healthy enough to play right now. So the offensive line, that stands out as #1 for me. #2, and hopefully Geno Smith's got enough time to be able to show this on the field and he isn't getting pressured a bunch, but getting to see Geno Smith running Ryan Grubb's offense against a non-Mike Macdonald style defense. And that's what he's been working against at practice. Hasn't played in the first 2 preseason games, but those 2 teams, the Titans as well as the Chargers, they run very similar defensive schemes. You're going to get different schemes in this game against the Cleveland Browns. It's going to be vanilla on both sides, but still, you're going to get a little different experience. This is really that first taste of what Geno Smith is going to look like, at least for fans running this offense. You'd like to see who he's going to have out there to throw to, what the O-line is going to look like. But Geno Smith indeed is going to be playing in this game. And so I am eager to see if he's able to take what he's looked like on the practice field. I think he's had a fantastic training camp. Put him under center against another defense in a game situation, even if it's only for 1 or 2 drives. Just let him get a few snaps in, and let's see how this offense looks for Ryan Grubb before the bullets really start flying when they're playing the Denver Broncos in week 1. This is a really good opportunity for him to get a few quick throws off, maybe take a few shots downfield, and just get himself better prepared to be able to run this offense in the real games coming up in a couple of weeks. So, of course, going to be watching the O-line, going to be watching Geno Smith and how he looks in this offense, how comfortable he is going up against other defense. If he's got Myles Garrett coming into his face, what that looks like, some real football to really evaluate this offense and where they need to continue to work before they play Denver in a couple of weeks. As far as number 3 for me, I mentioned this earlier. I don't expect to see Ken Walker III. I don't expect to see Zach Charbonnet in this game. So it's all about the other 2 running backs who are going to get the snaps. Now, George Holani did not play very much in the last preseason game. I've already expressed my opinion that was because the Seahawks feel like they've already seen enough from him in training camp practices, the first preseason game, making some big plays. But they're going to need to have him and Kenny McIntosh pick up the mantle in this game with the starters. George Holani's been getting some snaps with the starters in practice the last couple of weeks. So maybe he's the one that gets the start in this game playing with Geno Smith, and then they rotate Kenny McIntosh in, and we'll see how long McIntosh ends up playing in this game. But I want to watch those 2. I think at this point, I've projected both of them to make this roster, but I think this is still a big game for both players. So looking forward to the opportunity for those guys to have a starting offensive line, or at least 3/5 of a starting offensive line in front of them for a preseason game. See if they can get that run game going. Are these guys going to contribute some catching passes from Geno Smith in this game? I'm going to be eager to watch the running backs, and I'm expecting to see more of a 50-50 split with those guys both getting opportunities at least early in this football game. And the last thing I'm going to be watching here, I don't know if we're going to see DK Metcalf playing at all in this game. I do not expect Tyler Lockett. He's been dealing with a leg issue for several weeks that's really limited him in practice. They're going to make sure he's healthy for week 1. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jake Bobo, Laviska Shenault, the other standout receivers the Seahawks have, I'm going to be looking for the explosives. That's really the big thing for me. Are we going to see the explosive plays from the receivers? And that even includes your secondary players later in the game. Aesop Winston, he's had a little bit of a niche when it comes to snagging 20-plus yard catches. Cody White had a 33-yard catch last week. D. Eskridge, hey, this could be the absolute last strike for him in this game. Can he come up with a big play downfield? I want to see if the Seahawks are able to engineer some explosives. It would be nice to see a couple explosive passes when Geno Smith is out there with the starting offense, for him to have the time to make those throws. But I want to see what that looks like when you have more of your pieces together on the offensive side of the football, and you get a real chance to see how the chemistry looks out there in this new scheme. Jackson Smith-Njigba had a big game against Cleveland in the regular season last year. Maybe he goes out and gets a couple big catches early before exiting and treading his helmet in for a ball cap. I just want to see this offense generate some chunk plays, and maybe the run game as well. But I'm looking specifically the passing game, with this being Geno Smith's first opportunity to play in game action, running Ryan Grubb's scheme. I want to see if that ends up leading into a couple big plays downfield in the passing game. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to ensure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, our Blue Friday episode leading up to Saturday's preseason finale. Nick Lee will be joining me. The two of us will have our weekly picks to click, who we think is going to stand out on offense and defense, and we're going to outline some players to specifically watch on both sides of the ball heading into Saturday's finale. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday night, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.